Good Wednesday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope your afternoon is going well. Just a day away from the first round of the NFL Draft. Browns will get involved in all likelihood round 2 on Friday. Let's welcome in Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. As it sits now, Fred, 54 is where the Browns would pick towards the back half of the second round. I know you wrote an article about this. Andrew Berry has the flexibility to go up, go down, stay at 54. Take us through that article. And do you think they stay pat and make the pick at 54?
You know, your guess is as good as mine, Dave. You know, this is probably the strongest position going into the draft as far as roster. It was a strong roster last year, but they've added to it by re-signing several of the players that were free agents. So I really think they can. I mean, you could make a case that there's no starting positions available on this team. Obviously, they're always going to say there's competition. You're really you're battling for backup positions like backup tight end and backup linebackers and different things like that. So I really think they can go about anywhere, and I think that they're positioned that if there's a small core of players that they're interested in, that they could draft up a little bit, they could draft down a little bit to get more picks, they could stay pat. You know, anything can happen. And for somebody to be able to predict, I know that's what everybody wants to do. It really, to me, is impossible because, you know, we see it every year in the draft. A guy that's supposed to be available around 50 is drafted 30th, or somebody that was supposed to be drafted in the first round is available. And so I really think it's a long shot to, at best, especially at 54. And when you think last year the Browns' top pick was in the second round and it was 44, you know, we had a little better chance on what they do. And what they do, they traded it to get Elijah Moore. So I wouldn't even be surprised if there's a player that Andrew Berry thinks can help right now on another team, that they would trade the pick to get another player. But as I asked him around that story that I wrote in the press conference, how do you balance? You got to get some future needs addressed, but you're trying to win now. So if you think of last year on the inactive day, when there was like 7, 8 guys inactive or whatever it is, 4, 5, 6, 7 inactives, they were almost all the rookie draft picks from last year. So they weren't really helping them. They were developmental for the future. They really want to win now. So if they can get a guy that can help them now in the draft, they will. If not, they could even trade it.
So this is interesting as well. So this from USA Today. Biggest draft questions for all 32 of the NFL teams. For the Browns, will they try to trade into the first round? Perhaps it's for a falling defensive lineman or a cornerback, as the Browns' offense looks like it's ready to roll as it is. Fred, I don't know about you. I don't think there's any way that they give up what it would take to get into the first round. I can't see that. Certainly not for a cornerback. I just don't think there's the need to give up. You'd probably have to include Greg Newsome in any trade like that, and I don't think they're going to trade Greg Newsome.
No, I can't see that happening. You know, the most of a trade up we saw when he traded up to get JOK a couple years ago, and I think they went 8 to 10 picks, you know, to make that move. Andrew Berry even said so much. I think it's in the story I wrote that when they get within about 10 picks, that's when things start to happen, because then you feel like, oh, there's a legitimate chance to get somebody, so we could make a trade. But when you're picking 54 and the first round has 32 picks, if you're talking about going up almost a full round, yeah, even if you threw in a guy like Greg Newsome, I don't think there's enough for that. You see veterans getting traded like that for low picks, you know, 5th, 6th, 7th round picks, because Newsome's in the last year of his deal. So, and they're still waiting to see if they pick up the contract. So I don't know if I see no way to get in the first round. If they move up, it would be 8, 10 picks, I think, in the second round.
Agree with you wholeheartedly. All right, so this is kind of interesting. Ian Rappaport tweets out, the Lions have agreed to a contract extension for Amon-Ra St. Brown, 4 years, more than $120 million. So $30 million a year for 4 years, $77 million of it guaranteed. So that $77 million guaranteed, let's put it in context. This from the 33rd team. That is the most total guaranteed money owed to a wide receiver. Cooper Kupp is second at 75, Tyreek Hill 72.2, Devontae Adams 65.67, and Amari Cooper's $60 million, now the fifth highest guaranteed amount ever for wide receivers. When you look at that Jerry Jeudy contract starting to look better and better, and it's going to keep looking better and better because you got Jefferson coming up, you got Chase coming up, you got Higgins at some point. They're going to be St. Brown's 30+ million. Heck, Chase might be 35 by the time they get his done, or Jefferson might be 35 million a year.
Yeah, Brandon Ayuk. I mean, you can go down the list. And so Andrew Berry talked about that. I wrote that in the story too, kind of tipping a little bit. They've swung at a couple wide receivers in the draft, but none higher than the third round. So that's why I think with the premium on the wide receiver position, even though they traded for Jeudy, they could draft one of these wide receivers if there's one that they really like. This is one of the deepest classes. I think there's 12 or 13 projected to go in the first or second round. And when you get them, not being a first round pick, if you get a guy in the second round, you have him for 4 years at a real reasonable rate. You have Jerry Jeudy locked up, but Amari Cooper's in the last year of his contract, as is Elijah Moore. And so if you said, well, gee, Troy Franklin's a guy we really like and he's there, let's take him, then we have him, and you maybe aren't under the gun to re-sign Elijah Moore, or you have some flexibility to rework a deal to if you want to keep Amari Cooper. A lot of people say he's done after this year, but boy, he's very productive, and until you know you have somebody better, I certainly wouldn't want to move on from him, especially, and he's, late 20s, but he's definitely not long in the tooth. So, yeah, I think the wide receiver position is kind of getting hotter and hotter in the passing league. So it puts a premium on the wide receiver position. The Browns haven't been that great at drafting them, but obviously they haven't drafted before the third round for a receiver. So maybe they could hit on one in the second round, even though it might not be the biggest need right now.
So, you keep hearing they need a guy to go deep. They need a guy to go deep. I found this really interesting. Top 15 most productive go route runners last year, measured by yards per route run from Warren Sharp, so Sharp Football. Number 1, Tyreek Hill, 4.11. Number 2, DJ Moore, 2.95. Number 3, Amari Cooper, 2.72. 13th, the aforementioned Jerry Jeudy, 1.76. So while you don't have the guy that's quote-unquote the burner, you do have guys that get behind the defense, which, isn't that the result? I mean, that's what you're looking for when you're looking for a guy that has speed, somebody that can get by and threaten the defense. Cooper and Jeudy, 2 of the top 15 in the league doing it.
Yeah, and that's what you want. I mean, as far as that's what they gave the contract to Jeudy, as you said, to get ahead of the curve, but also for the upside potential that they feel that he can have with Deshaun Watson here. So it will be interesting. And, that's what I say. Amari Cooper's deceptive. He's not pictured as a burner, but he gets a lot of long yards after catch on moves or broken tackles. If you think about that, it would even been better. He had a 40-yard touchdown taken away when they blew a whistle last year that he stepped out of bounds when clearly he didn't. And, that would have increased it more. So he has a tendency to get behind him, and he also can go up and make the contested catch. So that's what they're looking at. And if you can add another guy, a young guy, that a lot of times rookies don't immediately step up and make production, but if you can put a guy in there with no pressure as maybe your fourth or fifth option, I mean that could bode well for the future there. And so I think they're liking where they're sitting. It's just, will they get that production that it looks like on paper again?
Fred Greetham, senior analyst from the Orange and Brown Report. Now I'm going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, 3 targets that the Browns could look at in free agency. Plus, we'll dive in a little deeper to specific positions in the draft. Sports for CLE. Be right back. Stay with us.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 million Ultimate Cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. This one from the Factory of Sadness. 3 Browns trade targets heading into the NFL draft. They go Khalil Herbert, running back for the Bears, heading into his 4th year. Still on his rookie deal, very good at avoiding tackles, 4.9 yards a carry for his career. Last season, 611 yards, 132 carries, 12 games. Also had a receiving touchdown. Number 2, wide receiver T. Higgins. Despite trading for Jerry Jeudy this offseason, Browns likely not done adding to their receiver rotation. Higgins would be the ultimate prize. Bengals are not going to trade T. Higgins to the Browns. Treylon Burks, wide receiver to Titans, similar to Jeudy. Trading for Burks could be low-risk, high-reward trade for the Browns. Another reclamation project, and likely wouldn't cost more than a late-round draft pick. Fred, of all those, the only one that I see being remotely possible is Burks, and I don't know. That one, I do know they liked him in the pre-draft process. And Andrew Berry, you follow the breadcrumbs like that with Andrew Berry a lot of times.
Yeah, he usually, Judy's a guy that's been. I was looking at old stories. I had story shells ready in case they traded for Jeudy last year in the fall before and I had it. I found one the year before. It just seems like if he's linked with him and likes them, if they're available. I liked Treylon Burks when he was coming out, and then they made a move that year, and I don't even remember what happened, but yeah, I agree with you. I feel that they feel they're set at running back. If they add a running back, it'll be draft on the 3rd round, in my opinion. They could draft one higher, but that's how he has done it. He's drafted 3rd-day running backs twice in the last 4 years, and I don't see him going away from that. If there's a guy there in the 4th, 5th, 6th round, they like, well, I guess they don't have a 4th round pick, but in the 5th, 6th round, even 7th round, I see him adding one or an undrafted free agent. You got Nick Chubb. They're talking. They feel like, I think that's optimism that he's going to return at some point, and I just don't think that. I think right now they look at Jerome Ford and Dante Foreman. Last year you had Kareem Hunt and Jerome Ford. I think they feel with Pierre Strong or maybe a rookie, that would be the way to go. They're not going to add a lot of money and assets, to get somebody like Herbert, in my opinion. Now, as far as Higgins, I agree. That would be, why would the Bengals trade him to the Browns? If the Browns offered a 2nd round pick even, unless nobody else did, so you'd love that. When he was going to be an unrestricted free agent, that would have been you go all in because you are hurting the Bengals immediately bad and you are getting a guy. But when it's a trade, um, they're not going to trade. That's why they tagged him so they couldn't just get nothing for him, or nobody would really sign him without them having the chance. So all the way around, I think low possibilities of any of those options, but if any, the Burks one he could trade, take a flyer on, but I really think that they would rather use, their second round pick on one of these wide receivers if they have them rated higher than Burks.
All right. I know you wrote a couple of articles. Do you think the Browns draft, and I'm going to combine a couple of them here, do you think they draft a defensive tackle or an edge rusher? Take us through both of those and kind of your thoughts on that.
Well, I think the case for the defensive tackle is you drafted one with a high pick last year, Siaki Ika, in the third round, but he never got on the field. He was one of the guys I was talking about that was inactive every game. I don't know what they think about him. They never really played him. He just practiced. So if they think he can step into the rotation this year and they're still high on him, they probably wouldn't. But you do have Dalvin Tomlinson and Shelby Harris that are 30 and over, and Maurice Hurst that's late 20s. So you have to address the room. And, I would think a lot of Buckeye fans would be happy if they got Michael Hall, and a guy like that, if he was available, it seemed like the way they put premium on defensive tackles more and more, that would be a nice fit because it would address. But if you feel like Ika's already in the mix to be kind of your stopper, then maybe you don't worry about it as much. As far as edge rusher, now that I do feel like they have their top four back by resigning Zadarius Smith. You have Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith, Ogo Okoronkwo, and Alex Wright. He really came on late last year. He had knee surgery in the preseason, but in the second half of the year, he had never had a sack as a rookie, and he had 5 straight games with sacks to end the year. And so I have to think that he is in the mix. The top 4 last year, Isaiah McGuire, 4th round pick, showed a little. So I think probably defensive tackle would be the edge, no pun intended, if they had an equally player available, but I could see them adding either position. The edge rusher is your premium position, and Andrew Berry likes to address premium positions like cornerback, edge rusher, offensive tackle. That's why I feel like he could go anywhere. If there's a DeJuan Jones type guy there at 54, they'd take him, even though he's a tackle. And we really don't know what they think of Jack Conklin, long term, or Jedrick Wills. So again, that's where I just say it really depends on the board and who they evaluate that's there and can help them right now or as soon as possible.
All right, let's take a look at the depth chart for the Browns as it currently sits for linebacker. We know you've got Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Don't forget Mahmoud Diabate. I think they like him, and when given the opportunity, he played pretty well. Played on special teams as well. They have Jordan Hicks, who they signed, Tony Fields, Devin Bush. Do you think I don't see them taking a linebacker early in this draft unless the next JOK is sitting there for them. They're pretty set at linebacker in my opinion. They want to get they want to get to 2 linebackers, their nickel package, as quickly as they can in this defense.
Yeah, they haven't put a lot of assets into linebacker. JOK is the highest paid linebacker on the team prior to free agency. So now Jordan Hicks, I think, is a little higher than that, but I haven't really studied his contract. Devin Bush, I think, is close to minimum. So, yeah, I agree. They want to use 2. You got JOK. I think they are high on Diabate. They paid him as like a preferred free agent to sign here. He really showed well in the preseason and in training camp. he just really didn't get to play much other than special teams, and he excelled on special teams. So I wouldn't be surprised if they have big plans for him as well. Tony Fields has been a plug and play guy, and they got him in the 5th round. So I can see them going, even a Dallas Gant, former Ohio State guy, went to Toledo as a late pick or a free agent. Or use a lower round like a Cedric Gray, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., somebody like that. So I don't know if they would go all in. If they really liked a guy like Trevin Wallace or Edgar and Cooper, they could go a little higher. But I think for the most part, they just want to add depth with some young guys that have speed that can cover out of the backfield. That's really where they were hurt. Anthony Walker, Sion Takitaki, great guys. But if you watch the playoff game, Takitaki was getting beat by tight ends and receivers down the field. And a couple times C.J. Stroud overthrew his receiver. They'd been touchdowns as well. So you need to have another JOK option that has speed, that can cover and kind of go sideline to sideline in this business.
Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Now I'm going to step aside, take one more timeout. Other side of the break, talk a little bit of wide receiver and then some options at 54 and 85 where the Browns currently pick. Well, we'll see which one Fred likes. I'll tell you which one I like. Sports for CLE. Be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. This also from the Orange and Brown Report. Cody Sueck, who works on the site with you, put this together, different combinations for the Browns at picks 54 and 85. So combo one, it was the focusing on offense. Wide receiver Jalen Polk from Washington, tight end Ben Sinnott, tight end from Kansas State at 85. Combo two, defensive combination. You got Michael Hall from Ohio State, defensive tackle at 54. Junior Colson, linebacker from Michigan at 85. Combo three, addressing future needs. Jerry and Cooper, linebacker from A&M at 54. And Ahmed Gaji, the offensive tackle from Yale at 85. Combo four, this one, upper tier prospects fall and a running back emerges. So they go Troy Franklin, 54, Jalen Wright at 85. Combo five, Chris Jenkins, defensive tackle from Michigan, Roger Rosengarten, offensive tackle from Washington. And Cody says that's just the thinking out loud one. And then combo six, this could be fun. Tight end, Jatavian Sanders, tight end from Texas, and 85, Malachi Corley, wide receiver from Western Kentucky. So, Fred, those are all within the realm of possibility at 54 and 85. I tend to like, I really like Corley. I think you need another tight end. If there's a way you could come out of the draft with Sanders and Corley, I think you have added future playmakers, which I think is important. Which one of those six would you pick if you had the chance?
Yeah, I respect Cody, and that was a quite fun story he wrote. It's hard. There's some mix and match in there, but I would think I'm going to stick with Michael Hall and the linebacker, Junior Colson from Michigan. I think that helps you on defense. Again, it's going to be what they think and where they think they could get that help immediately. Sometimes tight ends don't help you immediately. Sometimes wide receivers. A lot of these rookies, the reason they didn't play last year because they couldn't step in immediately. It takes a little time. And so this team's trying to win now. So you need to develop the future, but you also need guys that can help you now. So I'm just thinking out of the box a little bit, you know, that if you get Michael Hall and the linebacker, I think you've helped in two areas for now in the future. So I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. I think they'll address tight end in this draft, similar to how they did with Harrison Bryant. They took him in the 4th round. He was able to plug in quickly. There's not that many tight ends, but they could do that, as well. Any of them. So good options. We'll see what happens.
All right, so this is the Browns' depth chart ahead of the NFL draft from running back. We got this from the Akron Beacon Journal, so we'll tell you who we got it from. Nick Chubb, returning from knee surgery. Jerome Ford behind him. Naheem Hines, Dante Foreman, Pierre Strong, and John Kelly. Hines is kind of a guy that can return kickoffs and a receiving back as well. Do you think the Browns draft a running back in this draft?
Well, like I said before, I just think Andrew Berry has done in the past, unless he goes away from his tendencies, is more of a third-day back guy. So if there's one of the guys they like available 5th, 6th, 7th round, I see that happening. There's a couple, a guy like Will Shipley fits into their type of parameters, and he's projected to be maybe a 4th round pick, or a Carson Steele is a free agent. If the kid from Notre Dame, Audric Estime, became available, in one of those picks, I think that he would draw some attention. So, I do think if they make a pick, it would be in the 5th or 6th round on the 3rd day. Other than that, they would add a guy as a free agent, undrafted after the draft, because as you showed the depth chart, they like Naeem Hines as a pass catcher out of the backfield as well as a return guy, but they signed Dante Foreman to kind of be between the tackles, and they like Jerome Ford, and they like Pierre Strong. They traded for him last year. And then you have Nick Chubb, who nobody really knows the timetable. So I don't think they're looking for a guy that's immediately going to step in and start.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. Before I let you go, we've seen different experts think that the Browns are going to draft potentially an offensive tackle. If they do that, do you think they're ready to move on from Jedrick Wills? In other words, if they draft an offensive tackle at either 54 or 85, does it signal, even though they've picked up that 5th-year option, that the clock is kind of ticking on Jedrick Wills, do you think?
Well, I think it could be an indicator. I do know Andrew Berry used the term kind of we're offensive line snobs. And they have drafted offensive linemen every year. Like I said, DeJuan Jones last year, I don't know if he was the plan, but when he was sitting there in the 4th round, they had him rated as a 2nd round type and a 1st round. They drafted him. There's some guys there, that I like, that could be there in the 2nd round or in the 3rd round. And I could really, there's some guys on our site that have made the case to take, a left guard or a guard and a tackle for the future with their first 2 picks this year. So I don't know. I mean, you have to think DeJuan Jones is going to be one of the tackles. Conklin, you have a big number, if they're going to move on from him, then you would go with DeJuan Jones. You'd hate to think he was going to sit on the bench. So all the way around, yeah, it does depend on what they think Jedrick Wills. But before you're ready to move on from him, you want to make sure you have somebody that's as good, if not better, because Jedrick Wills, for all it's said about him, he grades out kind of at least in the middle of the pack as one of the, at least an average starter, and you don't want to get somebody that can't play at all. So I just think they'll show really what they're thinking. But if they think a guy's really good in the 2nd round, I don't think they'd pass him up and worry about what to do with Jedrick Wills. I would think that the thinking is, what do you do with Jack Conklin You know, a guy that's near 30 coming off major injuries 2 years in a row.
Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report, as always. Really good stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Fred.
All right. We'll see what happens.
All right. I appreciate it. Make sure you check him out. Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Always really good stuff. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns and draft. Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, straight ahead. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. So Browns do not have a first-round pick in the upcoming draft. Gets underway with the first round tomorrow. Adam Schefter tweets this out. I found this really interesting. These are first-round picks with their hit rate or miss rate based on whether they sign a second contract with the team that drafted them. So that's what a hit qualifies as hit. Centers, 11 hits, 1 miss, so 92%. Offensive tackle, 59%, so that's 38 hits, 26 misses. Quarterback, 46%, 26 hits, 30 misses. Wide receiver is the worst hit rate. 27%, 21 hits, 56 misses. You see the cornerbacks slightly under 50% at 38, well, under 40% at 38%. Linebacker just under 58%. Let's welcome in Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Tim, I found that really interesting. The line, you hit more often on first-round picks when you draft linemen.
Yeah, so you look at just who they've taken, those numbers. I mean, 77 wide receivers off the board, and only 21 of them are technically hits. That just shows, teams are trying to find receivers, and it is pretty hard to do so. There's so many factors that go into that. Health, the play of the quarterback that you have, if you play above your contract, essentially, there's all sorts of different factors that go into it. And that's why I'm not necessarily as hard on Andrew Berry as some other people about, the Browns missing on wide receivers, most notably Amon-Ra St. Brown, who just got that massive payday, 4 years, $120 million. He was a fourth-round pick. I mean, every team outside of the Detroit Lions would love a do-over on that one. It's hard to find really good receivers because, again, they go early, and you never know how it's going to play out because there's so many other mitigating factors. But it goes to show, it's become a premium position because, in large part, again, you look at that number, 77 receivers have gone in the first round in the time of that, in the span of that list. It just shows, teams are really trying to find that receiver.
Yeah, without question. So along those lines, this is the depth of the Browns wide receiver room before the NFL draft. Again, this courtesy from the Akron Beacon Journal, so we want to give them credit. Cooper, Judy, Moore, Tillman, Bell, Prochet, Woods are your top 7. I look at that, and I'd like to throw another body or two in that mix. And again, you don't know what Cedric Tillman is. Elijah Moore, was it the quarterback play that really sidetracked him? And I think Jerry Jeudy's going to be pretty good, but man, there is one lock in that, and it's Amari Cooper.
Yeah, and I mean, he's going to be 30. He's getting towards that dangerous number for a wide receiver, especially if the Browns extend him past this coming season. So, yeah, there's room to grow on this receiver depth chart, there's obviously they got Jerry Jeudy locked into an extension. He's not going anywhere. Cedric Tillman's got 3 years on his rookie deal. I can't imagine he goes anywhere anytime soon. And I think he's due for, a nice season this year. I expect, working hard in the offseason really to cure up some of the issues he had, with nuances of route running and those sorts of things. That's, I think, something he needs to really work on. And once he gets there, that's when I think he can really start to, become the player everybody thought he was going to be out of Tennessee, when a lot of people thought he was going to be a second-round pick. But, yeah, looking at this depth chart, there's nothing in there that says the Browns shouldn't still be looking to just keep adding bodies at receiver, continuing to try and plug away and find that explosive playmaker. Preferably, I think this team is lacking that true game-breaking speedster, whether it's a Troy Franklin, if he somehow falls to 54, or if they go for a more yards after catch guy like Malachi Corley.
All right, so this from PFF. One prediction for every NFL team in the draft. And for the Browns draft a running back in the top 100. Nick Chubb is under contract for just one more season, so the Browns spending draft capital. Long-term replacement makes sense. Their third-round pick is a spot where they could land Blake Corum, Jalen Wright, or Trey Benson. All of those are absolutely true. I wouldn't be surprised if they take a running back. I might be surprised if they did it at 85, though. They're going to go running back by committee. I think they're the days of finding like that bell cow back, I think they're over.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the way football has kind of gone these days. The days of guys like Nick Chubb and Christian McCaffrey, those are rare. You rarely see those guys anymore. But, looking at those three backs you specifically mentioned, I mean, the one I would want way more than the others is Jalen Wright, just because he's an incredible athlete. You've seen his production. I think he had about 1,000 yards at Tennessee and maybe 132 carries. So he had tremendous efficiency, tremendous explosive run rate, in the SEC of all places, which if you could do it in the SEC, you got a better shot than most backs to do it in the NFL. I mean, again, Nick Chubb, example A in that one, but I feel like it would kind of come down to, do they feel like the running back there would provide more value than, say, depth, on the offensive or defensive line or whatever? Because we know with the way Andrew Berry operates, value does play a role in it. The only time he's taken a running back, since he's been GM is in the 5th round when they took Jerome Ford. Would I be surprised? No, because I do think this team could use more explosive skill. I mean, I would think it'd be a great idea to double up on skill in the first 2 picks of the draft, especially if you got a Malachi Corley and a Jalen Wright. I think then all of a sudden you have an offense that has 2 explosive weapons that you can kind of deploy in committee situations and start to lean on them more as they get older. But it comes down to positional value and, obviously how much they want to value depth on the lines, maybe adding a linebacker somewhere in there. And we know Andrew Berry, even though they got 4 corners who have starting ability and potential, he loves taking corners. So who knows if another one's coming.
All right, you're going to like the next couple parts of this then. Best landing spots for running backs in the NFL draft. This from PFF. Tennessee running back Jalen Wright blazed a 4.38 40 in at the combine, averaged more than 7 yards per carry in a gap running scheme last 2 years. Stefanski's offense totaled second most gap scheme rushing attempts last year, making Wright an intriguing fit for Cleveland's potential ground game. So PFF, the analytics guys, see Wright as a fit in the scheme. Now, what's a little unknown, does that scheme get tweaked with the new offense?
That's going to be an interesting thing. I think that's, a question we may not really have an answer to until, mandatory minicamp, OTAs, those sorts of things. Maybe even training camp before we get an answer as far as to are they staying with this, the same type of run scheme they have now, or if they're going to tweak it now that you have a new offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, a new line coach in Andy Dickerson. So there's a lot of factors that, will have that kind of impact. But I think, again, Jalen Wright, I've said before, he's my number 2 running back in this class behind Jonathan Brooks from Texas. I just love the explosive ability, the fact that, not many guys in this draft have the ability to break a big play at almost any time they touch the football. And I wonder so much, if Jalen Wright, how much better his numbers would be if he had 20 more carries, 30 more carries, would we be talking about him as the number one back? Because, the workload wasn't high, and maybe that's kind of a weakness is he didn't get a lot of reps, that some of these other guys have. So maybe it's getting used to, understanding, like vision and cutbacks and all those sorts of things that you want a running back to have. But if you got a good offensive line like the Browns have, you want a running back who can hit the hole and hit it with authority. I think Jalen Wright's got as good abilities as anybody in this draft to do it.
All right, so this is the 33rd team's final 7-round mock draft. For the Browns, 54, they go Michael Hall Jr., defensive tackle from Ohio State, coming back at 85. They go with the aforementioned Jalen Wright, running back from Tennessee. So, Tim, let me ask you this. If you come out of the draft with Jalen Wright and Michael Hall, your top two picks, you happy?
I'm pretty happy. I mean, it would kind of be a little disappointing from my sense, maybe just because I'm a receiver guy, to look at, how great this receiver class is and kind of pass on it. That's where you kind of hope. Wish if you're the Browns, you had a third pick kind of in this top 100, 110 area to really get, an extra piece to try and get another skill player. But I think if you were going to get these two guys, this would still be a good way to go. Michael Hall, I think he's got some pass rushing juice to add to the defensive tackle group that I don't know if they have, and he's a very different guy than what they drafted a year ago. And Siaki Ika, I think, is more of your classic 3-4 nose tackle type of build player, and we'll see how he kind of grows in his second season. As for Jalen Wright, we talked about him a bunch already. I do think, the Browns really have to consider life after Nick Chubb, because, you don't know what kind of condition he's going to be coming back off his knee injury, and he is getting up there in age. So as much as Browns fans don't want to think about it right now, it is something that you have to start considering. I don't know if 85 might be a little early to do it. You could probably afford to wait to the fourth round, sneak back into the fourth round or whatever, get, a Bucky Irving or an Audric Estime or a Braylon Allen, for example, and just find another piece to kind of add a different dimension to what you have right now at running back.
Tim Bielik and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, draft day trades that make sense for every NFL team. Browns' biggest need in the draft, and draft sleepers, all straight ahead on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 million Ultimate Cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. This from the Bleacher Report. A draft day trade that makes sense for every NFL team. They go with the Browns getting a 2024 second-round pick, number 40 overall. From the Commanders for a 2024 second-round pick, 54, 2024 sixth-round pick, 206, 2025 fourth-round pick. Moving up would present the opportunity for Andrew Berry to add a playmaker at the wide receiver spot at 54. There will be talent available, but with a fast and furious run expected on wideouts to kick off the second round, failure to move up would thin out Berry's board of options rapidly. The only way I see them doing that is if somebody they fell in love with is fallen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, there's only so many guys, I think, that you would take that chance and maybe slide down. I mean, this is probably not going to happen. For example, if Brian Thomas fell to 40 and for some reason, everybody passed him through 40 picks, I mean, that would be quite the surprise to jump on. But I think if you're the Browns, you're probably best served to be patient, kind of wait to see who's there. You would have to imagine, because of just the quality of receivers, that guys are going to fall, that maybe a name or two that you didn't expect to fall was going to slide a little bit. And I think if you're the Browns or a fan that if both parties want them to take a receiver. What I think you're kind of rooting for is you're rooting for some of these offensive tackles, outside of the top 4 or 5 to go early in round number 2, to go often in the beginning of the second round, through the first 15, 20 picks, so that when you get to 54, maybe a Keon Coleman's waiting for you. Maybe a Troy Franklin's waiting for you. Maybe, Malachi Corley, who I don't know if he will go that early, but you never know in the draft. Maybe he's waiting there for you. So certainly a guy should be available to them at 54 out of that top tier. Otherwise, I'd probably be getting ready to push the eject button and drop back a little bit.
All right, this is from The Score. Every team's biggest need in the NFL draft. For the Browns, biggest need, they say, defensive tackle. Top early round targets: Chris Jenkins, Ruki Ahorohoro, Mason Smith. 3 of Cleveland's top 4 defensive tackles are over 30 years old, while the other, Maurice Hurst, re-signed to a 1-year deal. Finding future building blocks up front. Major priority for the Browns to remain relevant in the AFC. You know what? That's a fair assessment of needs. If you want to, quote unquote, needs, defensive tackle, a young one, I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I think the position where you really don't have a lot of long-term options for. You would obviously hope Siaki Ika makes a step up, in 2024, going forward into 2025, to give you confidence that he can be a guy that you can at least rely on a rotation going forward, if not possibly to steal a starting job. But I think, obviously, when it comes to long-term prospects of the position, I've said before, if you're taking a defensive tackle, be prepared to redshirt almost no matter how good they are. And looking at that list that, that was presented, Chris Jenkins, Brook Ororo, those are 2, kind of run-stopping type of defensive tackles. I think they'd be more ready to contribute right away than Mason Smith. Mason Smith, I think, is a guy that really does need that redshirt season. He had a great freshman year, got injured, pretty much missed his entire sophomore season outside of like a handful of snaps, I think. And then, came back last season, looked pretty good. Maybe not quite as good as it did as a freshman, but you understand, it was a torn ACL. So you understand that first season isn't always going to be, the best version of him. So I think those are actually 3 pretty good options you'd be looking at for defensive tackle if Michael Hull Jr. isn't one of those guys.
All right, take a look at this. This is from Pro Football Network. Top sleepers to watch out for in the NFL draft. So, wide receiver Jalen Coker from Holy Cross, Tyrone Tracy Jr., running back from Purdue, Jaheim Bell, tight end, Florida State, Isaac Guerendo, running back, Louisville, Luke McCaffrey, that is the brother to Christian McCaffrey, son of Ed McCaffrey, wide receiver from Rice, Taj Washington, Mason McCormick, Blake Watson. Of those sleepers, who do you like? Who do you think the Browns might be interested in, should be interested in?
I'm going to pick 3 out of the list. I'm going to start Jaheim Bell. I think a lot of people think he's a better tight end than where he's ranked. The issue is he's only 6'2", but pretty much outside of that, he's about what do you be looking for in a tight end? Effective as a receiver, got good speed, 40 time of 4.61, pretty good 10-yard split time as well, 1.59 seconds. So he's got a lot of good tools to work with there. With Luke McCaffrey, I mean, how could you turn down the family lineage? And you see what his father Ed has done. You see what older brother Christian has done. I'm not going to say Luke McCaffrey is going to be as good as either of those guys, but, for a guy who's still new to the receiver positions, only played it a couple of seasons, he's played pretty well at Rice. Elite 3-cone time, so he's got the ability to separate. Still kind of learning the position, but that raw athleticism is something you can't teach. And then Mason McCormick, I don't know if he'd be an option for the Browns, mostly because he's an older prospect, but I always look at, I reference this a bunch, that short shuttle time is kind of a cheat code when you're looking for offensive linemen. When you're looking for guys who are going to be long-term starters in the NFL, what you want to look for is you want a guy who runs that short shuttle in faster than 4.47 seconds. McCormick's time at the combine, 4.45. So even though he's going to turn 24 in late May, maybe he's a guy who, you'd be willing, if you're the Browns, maybe you want to bend those age guardrails for a little bit because, again, with that kind of agility, that proven track record, which Joel Bitonio has fallen under that, group of guys who have run a sub 4.47 short shuttle and had success in the NFL. Maybe you want to double down again on that with McCormick, who, even though you might not have him for, more than, 10 years or so because he's an older player, you still have a good potential depth guard that eventually you could work into the starting lineup.
Tim Bielik and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we have I have recorded a mock draft. Tim will come in after each of my 3 picks and grade the pick after I make it. Sports for CLE with the Sports for CLE mock draft straight ahead.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. It is 2024's first mock draft for Sports4CLE. So we're going to go to a mock draft simulator, and let's start the simulation here. As we will be waiting to pick 54, we will potentially make trades if they are offered. Trying to get a pick in the 4th round here. There's some value in the 4th round, especially with running backs, cornerbacks, and some offensive linemen. So any trade that we make is kind of with getting a pick in the 4th round in mind. And here comes our pick at 54. So Brian in the control room, what are we? Oh, we have 5 offers. What do we got here? I think we're going to reject the first one. Yeah, we're going to reject the second one. We're going to reject the third one. No, I don't like that one either. No, I don't like that either. So let's, we have Xavier Legette, Peyton Wilson. Who are some of the defensive linemen that are still on the board, Brian? Jenkins, Michael Hall Jr. Ooh. Go back to the wide receivers. So to me, it comes down between Xavier Legette, Michael Hall Jr. Let's go, for the purposes of this, let's go with Michael Hall Jr. All right, Tim, so I went Michael Hall Jr. instead of Xavier Legette.
I like that pick. I think Legette's an interesting receiver. I certainly would have taken him as well. I would have really considered him. I think there's some similarities in the way he plays to Malachi Corley. Similar build, 6 foot, 221 pounds, had a real breakout season for South Carolina, but you wonder if he's kind of a one-hit wonder, or is he a player that really just saved his best football for last? And I do think that matters a little bit. So that's kind of an interesting pick, but I think with Hall, you're looking at a player, an archetype the Browns have gone with a bunch under Andrew Berry. Young player from a Power 5 school. Defensive tackle is not exactly a value position, but if you're looking for pass rush, I think you look for it in all sorts of different places, and they really don't have a true pass rush defensive tackle. I think Michael Hall can become that. You can let him kind of develop in the background behind some of the veterans that you have at that position. So a nice, solid pick. I would give it an A-.
All right. Now, we're going to go back and make the next pick. And again, we're looking for trades if they happen. Now we're working our way to 85. All right. And we've got reject that one. Reject that one. Reject that one. Reject that one. Reject that one for now. Reject that one. Did I see Malachi Corley? Yeah, we're going to take Malachi Corley. We're not even going to make that trade. We'll take Malachi Corley. All right, so Malachi, when I did not draft Xavier Legette, was hoping that Malachi Corley would still be on the board, and he was.
That would be an A+ for me. I mean, I don't think you would make it to 85. I think if you were going to take him, you would either have to kind of bite the bullet and take him at 54 or trade down, 10 to 12 slots, pick up an extra third or maybe an early fourth round pick to kind of make that work. But I think Corley, we've talked about it before, just brings a skill set the Browns don't have. They really don't have that guy who's going to just get yards after the catch. At 215 pounds, he's bigger than most cornerbacks he's going to go against. So the idea, even though he still has to work on his nuances of route running, much like Cedric Tillman did when he came out of Tennessee, I think you can get Corley in situations right away as a rookie to let him excel because he's just naturally bigger than 90% of the corners he's going to go against. I mean, I looked this up before. At 215 pounds, he'd weigh more than every single corner the Browns have right now.
All right, so we have Hall, we have Corley. I was hoping to get a fourth-round pick, didn't happen, so we got to go through the simulator all the way to the fifth-round pick. Now we have one more pick left in this. And this is the, because two of the guys that I really liked were not available, we're just going to wait that out for no pick in the fourth round, where there was some value, but with Hall and Corley there, I didn't really want to do, those are two of the guys I wanted. All right, what do we have here? Nah, I don't want that one. Nah, I don't want that one. All right. We've got Audric Estime is still sitting there, and so is Wiley. So is Zach Zinter. I like all four of those guys. I'm going to go with Audric Estime. So let's draft Estime. So there you go. I end up with Michael Hall, Malachi Corley, and Audric Estime.
I think if you somehow come out of that with Audric Estime 156, I think that'd be a bigger shocker than Malachi Corley falling to 85. I think I'm higher on Audric Estime than a lot of people because he's a chunk guy. I mean, he may never be a guy who breaks off 60, 70-yard runs, but he's going to be a guy who's always tough to tackle, because he's just naturally a big guy at about 227 pounds, able to just get, chunk plays 6, 7, maybe he'll get 10 to 15, every 9 to 10 carries or whatever. When you have a guy who could do that on a fairly regular basis, that makes life easier. One thing that always gets talked about, maybe that needs to be talked about more when it comes to the running game, is the success rate. The idea that you want to get 40% of yards on first down, 60% on second down, and then convert obviously on third down. If you get a guy that can go above that success rate and continue to hit those plays consistently and get your offense ahead of schedule, then that just gives you so many more options. And the Browns, with Kareem Hunt, if he doesn't come back this season, they could use a power element of the run game, and that is absolutely Audric Estime's game.
All right. I know you've dealt with this topic on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Some names to remember for the Browns coming up in this draft that you like, and I'm with you with Estime. He's a guy. I saw a lot of Notre Dame football, and I thought that guy could play.
Yeah, I mean, I've said before, I know people got turned off by the fact that, he's just he wasn't a fast guy, that he ran the 40 in 4.71 seconds, that, it was kind of a turnoff for him. But for me, that's not his game. I don't think, like I said, he's never going to be a guy who's running away from people. He's going to be a guy kind of in the build of an Isaiah Pacheco, who I think is just going to rip off chunk plays. David Montgomery alike as well. Those would be the two guys I would most think of when I think of Audric Estime. And I mean, what team wouldn't want to have one of those guys who's just a pain to tackle, who's extremely just tough to bring down in the open field, and who's got a little more fluidity and vision than you would kind of expect for a back of his size. He plays with more than power is basically the number one thing I want to say about Audric Estime. He's probably getting undervalued because he doesn't have that home run ability.
So who are some other names to listen out for, you think?
I would go with, again, the beginning, the receivers. I talked, about Keon Coleman, Troy Franklin. Those would be the two guys for me that, if they fell to 54, those would be the guys that would really make me want to stick around at pick 54. And those are guys that play different style games. Keon Coleman, I think, he's got a lot of physical similarities to Cedric Tillman, although I think he's more polished. Coming out of Florida State, he's another young player. Again, fits into that Andrew Berry archetype that I talk about, young Power 5 players. And the thing with Coleman, he did not have a good 40 time, but if you watch the combine, if you paid attention to him running the drills, he was faster in those drills than he was in the 40. So that tells you, he's just a football player. He just knows how to get up to that speed. And maybe, he's not a track guy, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then, Troy Franklin, I think, would be kind of an ideal guy because speed to take the top off of defense. I know there's concerns about the frame, 171 pounds. I'm not as concerned about that because I think he'll get stronger over the course of his career. What's more my concern is drops. Can he be better at catching the ball? Can he use his hands better and not be a body catcher? But I think that was the same kind of thing we were talking about with Christian Watson, the different builds, but I don't think anybody in Green Bay is regretting the Packers taking Christian Watson a couple years ago, but because when he's been healthy, he's been an effective playmaker. So those are guys I particularly look at. Offensive line, I would kind of look in that third round, maybe a Patrick Paul from Houston, maybe if he's there. And this is going to be a spoiler for my Browns mock tomorrow. Karan Amagaji from Yale, who breaks the Andrew Berry archetype because he's never gone to the FCS before. I know there's all the Ivy League connections with Berry and Stefanski. And I think Amagaji would be the first FCS player they've taken. But the reason I would consider him, maybe not in the second round, but in the third round, I've said before, I don't know if I would take a tackle at 54. I would certainly take one at 85 because I'm much more concerned about the future offensive guard than offensive tackle. Because as when you had Fred Greetham on earlier, he was talking about, how do you know the guy you're replacing is for sure going to be better than Jedrick Wills? And with Wills, he's not necessarily a guy that, is playing like a top 10 pick, but before his injury, he was playing some of the best football of his career. So I think, maybe he really shines this season under Andy Dickerson, proves he's a good enough left tackle. Maybe you sign him to, maybe not a long-term extension, but kind of in the hockey world, a bridge contract, a 2-year deal, give him a chance to continue to prove himself. And then you would plug Amagaji in as a guard, to add depth behind Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller.
Tim Bielik, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Enjoy the draft starting tomorrow.
All right, Tim Bielik, make sure you check him out, cleveland.com, as well as the Plain Dealer. Always really good stuff, analysis on the draft and what the Browns might do. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.